So here we are right at the center of the dialogue, I would say. It's taken a long time to get here, but I think it's worth it. And this is center of the dialogue is two objections to the, you should say, you could say this, the thesis that Socrates is putting forth, the thesis that, okay, death is the separation of soul and body. That never gets questioned. And the thesis is that upon this separation, the soul, or psyche, has a continuing existence that is independent of body. And, what goes along with that for Socrates, that this is the great fulfillment of the philosophical life, because now, without the burden of the body, freed from the prison house of the body, the soul, which we can think of as mind or intellect or spirit, or whatever it is that makes us the knowing creatures that we are, the idea is that this finally can know truth, because it's no longer burdened by the body, and it's no longer held back by the senses. This Platonic idea of knowledge is knowledge of the absolute. So here, Simmias and then Cebes, but they both have their objections. I think that quite the more important and interesting one is actually the first one, and that is Cebes and his theory of the soul as harmony. He says, in this respect, replied Simmias, might not a person use the same argument about tuning and the lyre? Might he not say that tuning is a thing invisible, incorporeal, fair, divine? Tuning or harmonia, abiding in the lyre which is tuned, but that the lyre and the strings are matter and material, composite, earthy, and akin to mortality. So we could say that the harmony produced by the strings is a kind of an invisible and immaterial thing. But, he says, and when someone breaks the lyre or cuts and rends the strings, then he who takes this view would argue as you do, and on the same analogy, that the tuning or harmony or harmonia survives and has not perished. For you cannot imagine, as we would say, that the lyre without the strings and the broken strings themselves remain, and yet that the tuning or harmonia, which is of godly and immortal nature and kindred, has perished, and perished too before the mortal. The tuning, he would say, certainly exists somewhere, and the wood and strings will decay before that decays. What he's trying to say is that's ridiculous, right? As you would say of a musical instrument, that the harmony or tuning that it produces may be something that is immaterial, but once the physical instrument is broken, the harmony goes away too, right? And you can see where he's going with this. For I suspect, Socrates, that the notion of the psyche, the soul, which we are all of us inclined to entertain, would also be yours, and that you too would conceive the body to be strung up and held together by the elements of hot and cold, wet and dry, and the like, and that the psyche is the tuning or harmony or due proportionate admixture of them. And if this is true, the inference clearly is that when the strings of the body are unduly loosened or overstrained through disorder or other injury, when the psyche, though most divine, like other tunings or harmoniae of music or of the works of art, of course perishes at once, although the material remains of the body may last for a considerable time until they are either decayed or burnt. Now, if anyone maintained that the psyche, being the tuning or harmony of the elements of the body, first perishes in that which is called death, how shall we answer him? What Simmias has proposed there is a very daring thesis, and one that would be completely fatal. And that's what's important to understand here. Completely fatal to Socrates' argument for the immortality of the soul, because the theory of the soul, or the theory of the soul's relationship with the body there, is clearly that the soul is immaterial, but is dependent upon body. So that part of us may be soul or psyche, but that soul or psyche is completely dependent upon having a functioning body, so that when the body dies, the soul goes along with it. Just as we may say that the harmony produced by a musical instrument is something immaterial, divine, whatever, but It may not have any physical aspect, that is, but when the physical instrument is destroyed, the harmony disappears as well. So he's got this analogy that the soul is to body as the harmony is to the physical musical instrument. And so, although they're two different things, the tuning or harmony and the physical and the instrument, the soul and the physical body, they are two distinct things. But clearly, Simeus is saying, what if the soul is dependent upon body for its existence? If it is, then that separation of soul and body that Socrates says death is would also mean the end of the soul. This is the devastating, really, I would say, counter theory to the one that Socrates has been arguing for, and then we have the Siebes idea that that the soul may outlast the body, but it too may eventually wear out, which is an interesting argument, but I don't think quite, to my mind, as interesting as the Simius argument. But they're both taken quite seriously, and uh, Phaedo, who, after all, is we should remember is narrating this argument to Echecrates, says basically all the air went out of the room when these guys introduced their objections, which are really counter theories of death, theories in which the soul, upon its separation from the body, just dissipates and dies. Socrates has to. Well, he doesn't have to do anything, really. I mean, he's going to die, right? We should remind ourselves of that too. He is in his last hours. The time is coming up very quickly in which he will be called upon to drink the hemlock. That's the way that they are going to execute him. So that he doesn't have to do anything as want, but he does want. He doesn't want to leave them in this depressed state, thinking that Simmias and Siebes have a really good point, and it really looks like the soul is dependent upon the body and therefore doesn't outlast death. Socrates wants to do something. And I would say, it's a very delicate matter what he wants to do. Does he want to cheer up his friends, or does he want to find the truth about death and about the soul? I think both. But can he do both? That's what's really. So it really leads up to the last part of the dialogue here. It's quite dramatic and philosophically very, very interesting.